Hello, everybody. Grant Hunter here with another Product Growth Leaders topic of the week. This week, we're going to go back and talk again, I guess, about requirements. Now, Steve and I were having a conversation last week about how the people know there seems like to be little consistency in how people, what I'll call cascade or stack, right? Themes, epics, initiatives, user stories. And as you work on strategic narratives, and I'm like, let me go back to requirements. But Paul was just reminding me we had talked about requirements once before, but we got a new group of people and I got some different questions. So we're going to dig in on requirements this week. Sound like a plan?
Good plan.
All right. Well, Paul Hurwitz, thank you for being here again for requirements. Brian Weber and Cory Bryan, I'm going to lean on you now to bring a new fire to this one. I'm going to go right to our question. What are the keys to writing good requirements was the question. Cory, I'm going to go straight to the meat of the bone on this one, right? You
Sure.
don't like the word requirements.
Don't. I've been taught enough and I've heard enough and I've experienced enough. And that's what really sold me was requirements aren't really requirements. They are things that people want, but they're not really required. Requirements are things that there's a great talk by Jeff Patton about the things that he's learned and some information from Kent Beck from XP Explained, that great book, that requirements usually mean A, shut up, or B, they think that they're the final thing that's ever going to be. This is what's required. And it's usually not true in either cases. The requirements are going to change. That's the first thing about requirements, whatever you want to call them. And second is you really don't need that much for a product or service. There's things that it has to do, sure. There's things that you really want it to do. I wouldn't call those requirements. And that's where people get stuck on, well, these are the list of requirements. And if you keep questioning, I'm just going to tell you to shut up and go do it. In that case, it's not requirements, it's demands.
Good point. In fact, the first time I heard the term requirements, that's how I interpreted it. Somebody said, well, what if we made that a requirement? And I'm like, then I'll definitely not do it. I mean, you're not going to hold my feet to the fire on my product, but that was certainly my reaction as well. But I kind of thought you were going to go a different direction in this answer, in that most requirements aren't even requirements. They're specifications.
They aren't. Yeah, exactly.
And I remember I wrote an article, and I wish I'd kept it, but somehow or another, I got asked to write an article for some federal publication, which has not generally been my target market, about writing good requirements. And I started off with a big screed about how most of your requirements documents are in fact specs. Don't tell us how to build it. Tell us what problem you're trying to solve. Yeah. And I may be ruining Grant's entire thing here, but just yesterday, I was reminded of the story of Dean Kamen and the Luke arm. Do you know this story?
I do not know this story.
So Dean Kamen is famous for inventing the Segway, the scooter that police use, right? And
Paul Blart.
Yes, indeed, mall cops. Yeah, exactly. And he got contacted. I think he did a TED Talk about this. He got contacted by a general at the Pentagon who said, you're a famous inventor, and we would like you to work with us on building a robotic arm for the soldiers coming back from Afghanistan. And basically, prosthetic arms today are the same place they were in 1850. It's a wooden arm on a stick on a leather strap. And Dean's response, and I'm going to get to the point here in just a second, Dean's response was brilliant. He's like, I have great interest in the project. I have no interest in working with the government. I don't want all this nonsense that you people go through, multiple meetings and appearing before Congress and. And so the general held up a 3x5 index card and said, here's my RFP. And Dean's like, okay, I'm listening. And the RFP said, and I'm paraphrasing, and I'm pretty sure this is pretty close, build an arm that can pick up a grape and put it in a soldier's mouth without hurting either the grape or the soldier's mouth.
That's great.
That's it. I mean, there's no functional requirements, non-functional requirements, no compliance nonsense. I mean, it was just like boom, and it's been there's you can search for it. Search for Luke Arm, and there's a website devoted to it. So it looks like it's very close to being in production now. But I just thought that's that's my dream scenario for a requirement.
Yeah, that's more what I would talk about as a need. What are the needs, the customer needs that you have? Mm-hmm. And let's talk about those, which are much more important, much more impressive, much more something you can work with rather than a requirement.
Yeah. But I think that the whole idea of requirements is very much still around the factory model. It's like, the engineers are basically just typing. Right. So we give them these requirements. They wait for the JIRA ticket to come by on the little conveyor belt, and they just type it into their little computers. And it represents just a complete lack of understanding of how software is made.
Well, I think, and I'm going to let Paul and Brian actually get a word in as well. But
Cory and I are having a good time. You guys just leave us alone.
But you guys can do that on his podcast. But in my head, obviously we're not even addressing the question yet, but we're talking about the term of requirements. It's like, for me, it's like we came from a world of PRDs and MRDs, and requirements was this sort of generic term used for any documentation we hand to development, right? And even then, when it was 100-page PRDs, and now it's a 3x5 card, we're still calling it the same thing. And there's just there's a semantics issue there, which I think is where it came from. Paul.
Exactly. I think when we had this discussion in the past with me and May, I think that it really is, there's a semantics issue. Some people really just don't like the word requirements.
Cory.
And some people are just like, who cares what the hell you call it? I need somebody needs to tell the development team, which includes UX, includes engineers, includes everybody, what this thing is supposed to do.
To do or to solve?
What it's supposed to accomplish.
What it's supposed to address.
Exactly. What is it supposed to accomplish? It is supposed to solve this problem.
Yes.
Now, I'm sure we're going to talk about this when we get to the poll, but if I'm not mistaken, the poll that the number one answer was too many times requirements or specifications.
Development wants it to be specifications, right? And you are jumping ahead to the poll,
and that's a cycle that's just going to keep going and going, because engineers want as much detail as you're going to give them. And they want you to tell them exactly. If the engineers are asking you to write specifications, that means you don't have, I think, a good enough UX team that's working with the engineers to figure out what the specifications are.
I could see that. Steve, I'm thinking back to something I had learned when teaching before that I think came from your voice, but I could be wrong, that it's when engineers or development is asking for more detail, they're really asking for more context.
Correct.
Is that
correct? Or not. I mean, it could very well be that we've outsourced development, or we've hired factory workers and said, and now I'm coming and saying, give your team, as Cory points out, give your team a knotty problem that really needs to be solved. And let
knotty, KNOTTY, not NAUGHTY.
What you said. Give them a difficult problem to solve and get out of their way, or work with them to come up with a solution, ideally. And I think some of our developers say, what? Well, let me go another way. There's two parts of dysfunction here. One is we hired really junior people and asked them to do senior work, or we have senior people who've been slapped down so many times, they're like, screw it. Just tell me what you want. I'll build whatever you say. It'll be wrong, but I'll do it anyway.
And they won't get in trouble, which is why they want it as a spec.
Right. Totally.
Well, and Cory, you just said in the chat how a lot of times it's them, they don't know what to do, so they punt it back to product management, so the product management person fails, not them.
Yeah,
it's a requirements issue, not a...
Right. Giving them the autonomy and the charge of help us solve this problem is, if developers aren't comfortable with that, or teams aren't comfortable with that, they're going to push back. They're going to say, no, I can't build this until you tell me what to build, until you give me a spec, until you give me a design, until you give me something else. Some teams look at it and go, great, this is a great problem to solve. Let's work together to solve this. Those are teams that are fundamentally okay with failure. They're okay with experimentation. They're okay with learning. They're okay with figuring things out as they go. There's other teams, and I've worked with both sides of this and in the middle, but there's teams that, I don't want to take any responsibility when this doesn't work. So you have to tell me what to do so I can get my bonus and I can get my next job.
Yeah. And there's a chart we used to teach that was like domain expertise and level of documentation. And, that was goes with that. I've got a whole bunch of stuff in my head, and like, we haven't even gotten to the question, but Bryan has been sitting there waiting patiently. I wanted to give him a chance. I guess we're debating the concept of requirements.
Yeah. And I think my number one point in my answer was, you have to come to a common terminology. Do you call it a requirement? Do you call it a need? Do you call it a spec? Call it what you want, define what that means. It could be different for every team.
Dang, nice and simple.
To your point there, Bryan, I mean, this is I used to refer to this as a handshake. It's not a handoff. It's not, I'm going to log this stuff in Jira and I'm out. It's, you need to have what we call a discovery meeting, where you sit down with the dev team and say, here are some of the problems that we want to address. Let's brainstorm together. But the key is, if the people you're working with can't understand what you're telling them, then communication is not happening. I mean, the same is true as we work with marketing or sales or executives. If they can't understand what you're saying, then communication is not happening, if they're not listening to what you're saying. And so, to your point, Bryan, a very powerful, very healthy key to writing good requirements, oh, look at me, I'm getting back to the point, is to write them with your dev team.
Yep.
And I've done this in a number of times. It's usually quite funny. I mean, usually the product manager writes terrible ones. The product shall be more gooder, or be better, and then the developer is saying, no, is it an outer join or an inner join? And what's the SQL statement? And you're like, wow, you guys are both wrong.
Going back, Cory, you said before, you mentioned Jeff Patton, and he's the one who put me on the path of this belief that everybody on a team has to share the same understanding. That's a big mantra of his, that everybody has to share the same understanding. A lot of it is about communications and making sure that everybody understands what the problem is, everybody understands what the solution is, and then everybody can work together to figure out how to solve that problem with a product.
Yep.
I hear everybody talking, and I remember this from previous conversations, talking about autonomous teams and whatever. I don't think I've never had the luxury of working at a company where there were truly autonomous teams.
But all the product thought leaders write about it.
Yeah, but it doesn't really happen in most cases. Just because Marty Kagan said that everybody should work on autonomous teams doesn't mean that it happens everywhere.
No, it's true.
It just doesn't. I've always worked in teams where they really do want very much closer to specifications than requirements.
So I'll go with that and say, I don't like the autonomous teams. I like atomic decision-making and actions. So I do think we can enable And requirements may be part of how we do that, because there's this, what's our strategy corporate wise? What's our portfolio strategy? What's our product strategy? What's our go-to-market strategy? What's our, whatever it may be. If we enable organizations enough, you still need to, you can push decision-making out. You should be able to push decision-making out to empowered teams, another word that Marty would use, to do that type of stuff. But you need the right framework and you need the right guide rails to make sure that's happening. And maybe we're off the topic of requirements again. Cory.
And so I want to add one thing that is true. There are certain things your product does need to do. If you're working in a financial space, there are reports that have to be generated. There are certain rules that have to be followed, certain laws that have to be followed. Those are required. Yes, absolutely. And your product needs to do those. Yes, absolutely.
So functional requirements are the need, what we used to call functional requirements are the needs, the problems to solve. And then there are, true requirements. It has to have a redundancy. It has to have, work with this operating system or on this type of
platform.
And
those are choices that you're making as part of your product offering, right? We want it to be available here. This is the market we want to play in, the space you want to do. I'm talking
about,
there's
regulation that says you have to.
There's regulations you have to do these types of things.
HIPAA or
HIPAA, yeah, absolutely.
So those are required. What do we call, are those, what
those used to be called non-functional requirements?
Non-functional,
like security, performance, compliance are all
IEEE definition, right?
Yeah, correct.
So we have IEEE to blame for this whole conversation. Sorry.
I mean, I still think of those as true requirements. Those are the things the thing has to do. If it doesn't do this, the product won't sell, we won't make money, people won't use it, those types of things.
Okay.
And it's along the same lines as you've defined the problem, and you need to define this product must do this in order to properly solve that problem.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's get back to the original question from Monday. What are the keys to good ones? Kelly Walton came in and said, empathy, advocacy, and know thy audience are important aspects for good requirements, which should explain the pain and the gain for the customer user with enough context for the intended audience. I thought that was a pretty good, pros on that. Brian, you did talk about understanding what a requirement is in common there, but you then went deeper into big problem to solve and audience and that type of stuff. Talk to us about your keys to the good requirement.
Yeah, I think that one, it's, back to Steve's example of the arm that picks up the grape without damaging grape or soldier.
Yeah,
that's great at the executive level. The developers want to say, put the thumb and forefinger together to pick up grape. So it's those different levels.
Yeah.
You're not going to give that one index card to the development team and say, have fun.
But isn't that where you get an autonomous and empowered team, is where you have the ability to say, I don't care how you do it, or here are the constraints with how you do it, but this is the problem you need to solve, right?
In theory.
Which gets you back to the idea of autonomous teams.
Yeah.
It's like we've got this big hairy problem that we want to solve. Let's put some smart people in the room to solve it. And maybe that's the whole issue. There are two kinds of businesses, and maybe 90% of them are the second kind. I mean, the first kind is giving problems to solve to empowered teams, and then 90% of the world is factory work. Build me this thing because I said so. I mean, the most common form of user story I see, as I joke about in our class, is as a user, I want this feature because it's the feature I want. And by the way, Kent Beck, who you mentioned earlier, wrote, tell me stories of what the system will do. Write down the name of the story and a paragraph or two. He didn't say, as a role, I want a thing so I can achieve benefit. He's like, talk in like human language. But someone else came along and said, well, why don't we structure that into a nice Mad Lib format? And that's what has become user stories.
Yeah.
So I think to your point, Grant, you're saying the keys are either recognizing you have factory workers and giving them factory work, or what I've always tried to do is work with the team to increase their understanding of the context so that we don't have to get so much weighed down in the details.
Yeah, and Paul went into that. Paul said everyone on the team needs to share the same understanding of what is required. And in my Drucker on product Twitter stuff I'm doing, I just had the aim of marketing is to know and understand the customer so well that the product fits them and sells itself. I tend to change marketing to product, but earlier this week we had marketing is the whole business, or product management is the whole business seen from the point of view of its final result, from the customer's point of view. Concern and responsibility for marketing or product management therefore must permeate all the areas of the enterprise. So what I said in that was it's product management's responsibility to make that a two-way street. It's not just us writing requirements down and giving it to them. It's also engaging them in the process so they can help write requirements, so they understand the stuff. They have that knowledge of their own for that understanding. I think it's critical we do that. And that's where the requirements come, is how do we get that understanding? One way is us doing a storytelling. The other way is to get them out into the field and to do that. I think getting them more engaged in that problem discovery and persona discovery can help them. To me, that would be a key to good requirements as well.
Yeah, Melissa Perry just had a good podcast, our product thinking one, about how to engage engineering. And it was a whole, when you bring them in to understand the problem versus keeping them out, in that you have different types of engineers. Some say, I don't want to talk to the customer, just tell me what you want. Or others want that feedback directly from the customer. So they can be involved with the, determine what the solution is.
No, that makes a ton of sense. You guys ready to go to the poll? Our poll question is, what is your biggest challenge with requirements? We had executive overrides, sales requests, lack of access to customers, development wants specific specifications, not requirements, and other or it depends. The clear winner with 42% was development wants specifications and not requirements. Steve, how would you have voted?
Much to your surprise, I actually did vote this week.
What?
A startling churn of events, I know, but I voted for the one that won. That development is demanding more precision.
Okay. I voted for executive overrides, and partly because we've been seeing that in some of the prospects we're talking to, that the executives are doing an overweight influence on product management. Cory, how did you vote?
I said other, it depends, mainly because I don't like it. That wasn't an option, so I picked other.
And that back to you not liking the word requirement.
I don't like the way that requirements have been talked about, handled, and understood over the last at least 15 years that I've been building software technology products.
25. I've been talking about these issues since I started this business 25 years ago, and it's the same story. And yet it used to be, as Grant was pointing out, we used to talk a lot about, the product shall do this and the product shall do that, following the IEEE model. And then user stories came along, and everybody's like, all right, well, now I have to write the same thing as user stories. And it's always been a conflict.
Yeah.
Perhaps why product managers are not actually doing product management in so many cases. They're just doing the secretarial work for development.
So Cory, if there was an option here, which was the biggest challenge with requirements is that it's called requirements, would you have voted for that?
Yes.
Okay, I got you.
I have to jump in here. Cory, you seem to have this mental and emotional problem with the word requirements. Because
it's not required.
Because 15 years of people telling me things are requirements, you have to do this. And when I build it, when I put it out into the market, nobody gives a shit. So was it required? To whom's satisfaction? To the person that's using this product to try to solve their daily problems? It absolutely was not required. To the VP who said, if you do this, I will get my bonus, it is required. That's, yes, I have requirements abuse, survivor abuse.
Well, that goes actually, I've been on this rant the last couple of weeks of the difference between customers and users, that you build things to customer specifications and requirements without enough thought as to the users themselves and whether or not it is useful and usable to the users.
I have the same problem with the word stakeholders, but we'll save that for another rant.
I think we talked about that last week, didn't we, Cory? I remember some conversation with stakeholders on you. Well, but to Steve will say, the only other industry that calls their customers users is the drug dealers, right? Is users even the right? And I think there's a customer, who buys, and there's a customer who uses, and I tend to like customer better than user. I understand your point, Paul. Brian, help me out here. Get us back on track. How did you vote?
I went with the specifications one.
Okay.
That one.
So did I.
Do you find that, it's to this day, it's still what you see the most, is that development wants
It is. Yeah, it's, you try to put out the requirement of, I just had one recently. This functionality needs to be disabled when we've created it from Salesforce. Question I got was, well, how do we know when it's created from Salesforce? And that's where you get into, okay, when this field in the database has a value
that says
created
Salesforce.
from Salesforce.
Yeah. I had a client I was working with last year who they called and said, our development and systems team says our requirements are terrible. And they sent me a requirement and I read it and I'm like, yeah, it is terrible. And it was a specification. And I had them take our problem story module in our course to shift it to the who, the what, the why type concept, not the how. And in 30 minutes, everybody went, oh, and I think in that case, you had a development team that was looking for real needs, right? Context and that type of stuff, not the specification. So, it's not all teams, but I know it's biggest challenge. So,
yeah, I think part of the problem is also that a lot of, in the technology industry, a lot of the product managers came up from development and they jumped to solution right away. They're used to giving solutions. So I'm going to give a solution. That's what I know.
Yeah.
I get caught in that all the time, and I have to pull myself back and rewrite things where I take the solution out of it.
Well, and it's also the business analyst layer that some of us came from, right? Where you had to lay out a workflow and you had to provide some, that's where somebody was saying, I think it was Paul, the UX team becomes more important to help with that translation if you've got a good design organization. So, all right. Let's get to our first question. New question this week. What are the best ways for product management and development to collaborate on requirements? So I talked a little bit about, the Drucker concept of we should engage them, and Melissa Perry, I guess, I talked about as well, engage them in the process of discovery to help them understand themselves, see it firsthand, observing that type of stuff. What other ways to make that collaboration requirements work so we can make this whole requirements process better? And Cory, I'm going to start putting air quotes on requirements just so I'm open for a new word, but it happens to be the word we started with. So what are the best ways for us to collaborate with development, for product management and development to collaborate?
I think one of the best things is come to them with that index card need and say, let's work together and break this down into what are the finer level needs or how do we accomplish this? So come to them with the big problem without the details.
So really do the who, what, not the how.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Paul.
It's what I basically wrote, which is basically the same thing as what Brian just said of make sure you discuss with them and come to them and say, this is the business problem that we're looking to solve. And this is the strategy or the idea that we want to provide a business solution that we want to provide to solve that problem. The more context the engineers and the development team has, the better they're going to be able to provide a product that meets that requirement of solving the problem. And going back to Jeff Patton, it's making sure that you sit down and discuss it with them, that everybody shares that same understanding. If you write down, even if you write this down on an index card and you throw that over the wall to the engineering team, I guarantee you, you're not going to really get what you want. If you take that business card and you sit with the engineering team and you say, hey guys, this is what we want to do, let's talk about it, then you're going to get pretty darn close to what you want.
Okay, I like that. Cory.
The best ways that I've found to do this,
outside of changing the word from requirements, I got that. That's a non-starter.
The best ways are big visualizations. I like taking and creating a story map on a whiteboard. I've been yelled at by many IT organizations from taking pictures off walls or taking up whole whiteboards to build a huge story map that I start with and then invite the team over and help me build it out, because I want everybody to see the bigger picture. I don't want
how these go together.
Yeah, I don't want to get people focused on one little thing. I want to see how that one little thing fits into the bigger picture. And maybe there's more important things that we need to discuss. But I love doing that, whether it's on a whiteboard or in Miro or something like that. I like big visualizations of the whole problem that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, and then on the whiteboard, you write "do not erase," right?
Of course, in permanent marker.
Yeah. I've done that exercise and it can be very valuable for them. Steve.
It's a good starting point, at least.
Yeah.
The best way to collaborate with development is to actually collaborate with development. I mean, some guy whose name I can't think of at the moment, maybe Steve McConnell, adopted the concept of the 3 C's, that the card, the requirement, the story was never intended to be a contract. It was a contract for a conversation. It's a placeholder. And, the JIRA ticket is not the thing. It's the thing that sparks the conversation. So the 3 C's are the card, the conversation, and then from the conversation comes the confirmation, which is your acceptance criteria. So in this collaboration, you'll say, here's this problem we're trying to solve. Let's talk about that problem so that you've got the context necessary to do a design, and we'll know your design is good if it meets these confirmation or these acceptance criteria. So collaboration requires a collaboration. Sometimes you just need to talk to somebody.
Yeah. And I think also, so in the way we do it with problem stories, you use the problem story around the constraints and the needs and the acceptance criteria to help people come together to do it. Yeah, I'm going to just come back to the whole engage them. I know that Teresa...
I have to make a note for those listening in. It was actually Ron Jeffries that I was just quoting about the 3 C's. And he is one of the founders of Extreme Programming.
Okay, good to know. What I was going to say is, this is also a place where I think product discovery come in. I tend to bifurcate. Problem discovery is the discovery you do going to the market to discover new problems and validate them, and if it's something we should even focus on. Product discovery is where we engage with design and development to go out and understand customers, to find the right solution for them. And I think that that's another great way to collaborate with them is in helping them understand process and observe the way people do stuff, find those, what are they doing 3 minutes before, 3 minutes after, to start looking at workflows and find places for integration. And I think that, we'd be remiss in talking about collaboration to not talk about some product discovery as something where it's such a hot topic right now, and you see a lot of people talking about it. Uniquely to that, it's also a great place to go do that. So any last thoughts on collaboration, Cory?
I will have one last thought, which is a lot of the companies or teams I've worked with in the last couple of years, when they do get passed down requirements, one of my first things for them is find the need in those requirements. It's reverse engineer it, right? They give you a PRD, they give you a BRD, whatever. It's 140 pounds long. Figure out what they're trying to do, reverse engineer it, and actually come at this with a better angle. Again, because you'll probably discover that of that 140 pounds, you may need 16 ounces to solve that problem. So let's work on that first, and then we can do the other parts in a nice business diet.
No.
It's funny that you say that story, because I was working on a couple of projects this last summer that had exactly that scenario. I was being told, this is what I want, do this thing. And I'm like, you know what? For the life of me, I don't know why you want to do that. And I don't even know how to do the thing you have asked me to do. So could you please use that in a scenario so I've got an idea? And sure enough, every time when the person clarified, what they had asked for was not what they wanted. So now we're back to, guess what? The third item of the Agile Manifesto is whatever that is, delivering what the customer needs, not what the contract says.
Yeah. I was thinking the reverse engineering, one place I've collaborated with development is when they're doing a next generation platform. I work with engineering to reverse engineer the current product into those needs, those problem stories. So I love the idea, even at a requirement level, of doing that. Who gets to, what is the problem we're solving with this feature if we define it as a feature? Awesome. The next question there's a bug in my head about how companies use the terms themes, initiatives, epics, user stories. And I wanted to sort of talk about what if we're going to use hierarchies and requirements, and I, again, air quote on requirements, what are a theme? Are themes and initiatives the same things? Are epics and MVPs the same thing? User stories, problem stories, this is a lot of word soup. What would you say, Cory?
All stories, it's just the size of them is different.
Is an epic do you see an epic as a
really big story?
Big story.
Big story that can be broken down into smaller stories? Is it a theme of stories?
I don't care. It's a big story. It's a big story you can't build by itself. You have to break it down and implement smaller stories. And whether you do that 1 time, 6 times, 64,000 times, I don't care. It's a big story.
Okay. Paul, what's your take?
I was going to say something completely different, but I completely agree with Cory now that he said that. In some past roles, I have seen themes as, I think of them as like the company's overarching goals for that year, kind of a thing. Like the company might have 5 goals for this year of increasing revenue or decreasing churn or increasing better UX, whatever the company's goals are, that those are the themes. And then you have initiatives to achieve those themes / goals. And then epics and user stories are really just sort of the same things. Just one is bigger than just bigger stories than the others that have to get broken down.
Yeah, no, I get that. And maybe it's we should describe this. I look at a theme as here's the single overriding problem I'm solving in this category. So it's a safety in the mind thing, right? And then the epics are different components of things we might do for safety in the mind, and then user stories and break down below that. But it seems like everybody uses different language. In epic means different things for different people. And so, Brian, your take.
Yeah, I think it goes back to my first point. What's the common understanding of it? Everybody has different meanings. Where I'm right now, we don't use themes. Initiatives are the corporate goals, increase sales by 25%, whatever. Epics are something that'll take a year to deliver. We put features in there that can be delivered within a quarter. And then you have user stories that go into a sprint.
So user stories is the atomic thing. It goes to features, it goes to epics, it goes to initiatives.
Correct.
Okay.
So I think it's just wherever you're working or whoever you're working with, have a common understanding of what each of those words mean.
Steve, your take on these.
Well, I reluctantly agree with everyone. So I want to run with story just for a second. I was working with this one team, and they did something that I thought was stupid at the time, but the more I think about it, the more elegant it is. Instead of using this particular language, they started, or at least as a metaphor to help them understand what Brian just said, is there are books and there are chapters and there are paragraphs and there are sentences. And all of them are part of telling the story. And I was, a quick aside, I apologize. Stephen King wrote a novel called The Stand. And when he wrote it, his first book had not really sold well yet. And so he brought this 1,200 page book to his publisher, and they just burst out laughing. You're a first time author that we have no proof of, and we're not even sure we can make a book that big, and we're not doing it. And they said, you need to cut it down to 800 pages. And I'm actually leading up into breaking epics down into stories here. But anyway, he said, well, I can't possibly do that. And they said, oh, well, we can just cut the last 400 pages out of the book. And then we've got an 800 page book and we're happy. And he's like, well, that will never work, right? So he went through and eradicated characters. So wherever this character appeared in the book, he just removed him. And he got the 1,200 page book down to 800 pages. And you know what? Later on, when he was famous, he put out the 1,200 page book, and I think the 800 page book was better. And I think the same. So I like Cory's point that these are all, the story metaphor is the right one. Some stories are big, some stories are small.
So I usually lead with the fact that I don't want to deliver on a theme. I don't want to deliver on an epic. By that, I mean, if I've got something that's going to take, let's say it's an epic that takes 6 months. If I don't deliver anything until that 6 month is done, until that epic is done, then yes, I can deliver an epic all at once 100%. But I've waited so long that
you haven't tested anything.
I haven't tested anything. I haven't learned anything. I have a huge amount of risk. I have a huge amount of integrations. I have all these problems. So if you're doing that, then yeah, maybe those things make sense on delivering themes, initiative, and epics. But that's the wrong thing to do, in my opinion.
I get it completely. And now this is more of a waterfall type project. I for a client once used there's a middle school like half a mile from my house. That was the old original high school. It hadn't been touched in like 50 years. And they did a multi-million-dollar project to upgrade everything. So upgrading outdated facility was the theme, if you want to have it, right? The initiative. Well, one of the things they had to fix was traffic patterns. When that was originally built, there weren't these neighborhoods built around it. Now there's all these neighborhoods built around it. They had to fix traffic patterns, right? And so traffic became one of it. That is an epic for them. But the user story that I always love is they created a single parking spot in 2 places on the road, right where the crossing guards were, because the crossing guard needed a place to park the car so they could sit in it when it was cold. Now that to me is a user story. Sometimes the weather is bad and the crossing guard sits in their car when there are no kids to cross, right? So we need to solve the problem that the car needs to be near there. But that to me, that was a nice nested way. We're upgrading everything. We're doing traffic. The crossing guard needs to park their car. Sort of a different way for me to look at it. So, all right, let's go into our lightning round, and we do have a little time so we can make lightning a little more thunder. What is your advice to a new product manager on writing good requirements? Paul.
I'm going to go back to my mantra of sharing the same understanding. Share as much context about the problem that you're solving with the team so that they know exactly the reason why they're building what they're building.
Awesome. Brian.
Talk with the team that's going to do the work as you write the requirements.
So engage with them, run stuff by them.
Yeah, collaborate with them. Going back to your previous slide. Yep.
Awesome. Cory.
In addition to all the other stuff that we've talked about, I will give 2 words of 2 rules, or 2-word rule: write less.
And do what more?
Talk more.
Talk more?
Yeah.
Or help more?
Talk.
Both. Yeah.
Okay. Steve.
Well, in my first job as a product manager, I sat down with development and said, I really want to do well here. How can I help? And they said, it was just like, first of all, they were shocked that one of those marketing flakes would have any value add to this conversation at all. But they said, you know what? We got plenty of people telling us what to do. What we really would like to hear is what problems you're hearing from whom. Real voice of the customer, real problems for us to solve. And then, by the way, they also said, by the way, we'd like to know, what are your business goals? Where do we want to be in 3 years? What marketing campaigns have we run? How many deals have we won with our product, and who were they, and how big was it? They wanted to be part of the business, not just factory workers. And it really colored my entire relationship with development as years went forward. It was like I think of them as craftsmen, not factory workers.
That's great. Actually, we've got a client we're doing something like that with, where we're talking about customer value and business value and how they should be able to identify for each requirement what is the value it's delivering to the market and what's the value it's delivering to our organization. I love that idea of the business aspect of it.
Can I add on just one little thing to what Steve just said?
Please. As long as it's not what I was going to say.
I doubt it. Years ago, I attended a workshop that Rich Mironov ran in New York City, and a line that he said has stuck with me ever since: be a mensch, not an MBA. Talk with the team, work with them, find out their needs, be nice to them, and don't just try and throw sales goals and business stuff at them.
Yeah. What exactly is a mensch? I'm from the Southeast.
But sorry,
not from Miami, that far south. So
sorry, mensch is a Yiddish word which just means a really nice guy.
Ah, cool. Well, let me quote Rich back to you, which I thought. So there we go. He and I were doing a session together, and he said, "You know what? Product management is a lot like parenting." And I took it a step further and made it totally incorrect. But it's more like product management's the father and development's the mother. So like as product management, you're involved a little bit at the beginning and the end, but the real work is being done by development. But it's an interesting metaphor nonetheless. We both love this child and we want it to do well, in life.
I agree with that. And for me, what I'm going to say is get them earlier in the process, right? Bring them in. So as you're out discovering things and thinking about potential problems to solve, have those times where you talk with them about stuff you're seeing and learning and get their feedback on it. Because sometimes it takes multiple iterations and multiple times going back to the market to truly understand the context, the value, the who, the what, the why, and the pain, and what we should, what the situation is. And if you're sharing along the way with development, they're going to ask clarifying questions that help you get clarifying before it's time to go. And by the time it comes around to actually doing these things, you're now putting it into a sprint. they actually have some intimacy with it already. If you haven't even brought them out to it. So get them earlier in the process, help them, see at least your trusted people, the leads, get them further upstream with you. So that would be my take on that. Great conversation. Maybe sometime we have to just do a debate forum on words. We have a lot of words in product management that we seem to have, emotional baggage tied to. Maybe that becomes one of our topics of the week, is like, what are the product management terms that you have emotional baggage with? I know I can come up with that. That would be an interesting way to go. But we definitely hit that nerve with the air quote requirements word and Cory. What a wonderful conversation. I think many of us, changed our opinions. I think it was Paul who said, gosh, I was going to disagree with you, but I agree with everything you said. And so, as always, what a wonderful conversation. Cory, Paul, Brian, Steve, my partner, thank you so much. We do this every week in the community. On Monday, the question goes in. On Wednesday, we have the poll, and on Fridays, we have this great conversation. So thank you guys so much. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week in the community.